plunging straight back into the Industrial Revolution, just tracking a very brief social history, really, of money, or its lending and interest, just so we can get up to date. So imagine the Industrial Revolution is well underway, and there's 9 million people in the country, or in England and Wales, and about 1/3 are engaged in agriculture, but 78% still live in the country. The constant growth of England's home industry and overseas trade throughout the 18th century depended on the finding of money for those purposes, and it was not then so readily available as it was in later times. Government was a strong competitor in borrowing. But the technique of the money market was being perfected in London. After the decline of Holland, what that's referring to is the Venetian bankers moved to Holland and then came to London. This all goes through these banking families right back through the Venetians, and you have the Vatican involvement and all sorts. Anyway, after the decline of Holland, the city became the centre of the world's finance, where capital was more easily to be had than anywhere else on the globe. So London basically became the world's, won't even say it. Joint stock methods had suffered a setback with the bursting of the South Sea bubble in 1720, but they lived down that discredit, and men learned to be a little wiser in the future. Oh, the irony. The joint stock company was indeed admirably suited to the social structure of that aristocratic but commercially minded century, for the landed magnate could, without becoming that abhorred thing, the tradesman, meet on the board the city man and act with him, so that the political influence of the one could be joined to the business brains of the other. But even more than the joint stock company, the growth of provincial banks all over the island financed both the industrial and the agricultural revolutions. These banks were family or one-man concerns, therefore not always secure, but on the whole able to supply the needs of expanding businesses with necessary funds. Then, too, there were the Jew and the Quaker, both rising into the front rank in the city and the banking world of England, each bringing certain values. Between the time when the Jews were expelled by Edward I and the time when they were readmitted by Cromwell, the English had learned to manage their own financial and business affairs. There was therefore no danger of Hebrew domination and of the answering reaction of anti-Semitism. By Hanoverian times, England was strong enough to digest a moderate influx of Jews, and, as the prosperity of Holland declined, many of them moved from Amsterdam to London and became prominent there in stockbroking. They developed the development of the city. During the 7 Years' War, Samson Gideon was important in the city as a banker. In the next generation, the goldsmiths came to the front, and in 1805, Nathan Rothschild founded the most famous of all Jewish houses in London, usually linked with the family's establishments in other European lands. But besides the great city Jews, there was also a low type of Hebrew moneylender, now prominent, abhorred, not without reason, by his victims, the impecunious and unthrifty of all classes. It goes on to mention that the Quakers, too, were then becoming a power in finance. So, a little potted history, or social history of interest and money, and obviously people needing money. What is banking? What is money? Is ponder. Go ponder. I do have a different insight into much of what's being said out there, and this is by no means I'm right and they're wrong. I'm merely putting perspectives that many people perhaps haven't had or don't want to have. Let's look at the pyramid scheme. It's like, what is a pyramid scheme? Before doing that, I want you to think of something called the Gaussian copula formula. Now, that was the formula that was used actually to trigger the collapse in 2008, and I talked about that at the time. It's a formula which takes all elements of risk and says, oh, sod the individual calculations, they are too heavy and too complex and infinite, so we'll take it from the perspective that whatever they are, they all sum up to what we have before us today, which is, of course, whatever the market value is that day. Now, anyone who's into music, sound, whatever, will see that that's a feedback system straight away. It's designed to feed back and explode. It's a destroyer. But the people who work in the city truly wouldn't get that, Let's not fool ourselves that these are intelligent people. They just have lots of money and like to, the big boy bravado shit. So don't ever lose sight of the reality of them. Most of them quite literally couldn't hold a conversation about finance or money. That's something you'll find if you go and engage them. They don't actually know what it is. And they don't, truthfully, give a flying fuck either. So, this concept of summing to zero, it's a very ancient concept, a very interesting one. Those who like to look at the historical philosophy behind symbols such as the swastika, and then how it was abused and reversed by the Nazis, and so what was a good symbol has been hijacked, and it's got all these nasty connotations. Very, very true. But as ever, it just depends how far back you go, I guess, because that symbol always was in just about every culture that you can go and look at. It's certainly not pagan as such. It goes way, way back through Eastern cultures into, and China. It's there. It's in every culture that you can go and look at, which kind of begs the question, where did that come from and why? And that's a worthy thing to do. I wonder how many who do that actually realize that what they're looking at is a symbol which sums to zero. If you can imagine that symbol, what you have is any given arm has a counter arm. It looks like it's spinning, doesn't it? So what you have is an upward thrust counterbalanced by a downward, a left counterbalanced by a right. You have, zero. You have no movement. And this actually is used in physics. It's a physics principle. It is where all forces sum to zero. So a symbol which actually does that before your eyes actually does trigger a very emotive response, a very deep response, because its sacred geometry is that perfection I've just talked about, where all forces sum to zero. So you can also make up a financial system based around the same concept, where all forces sum to zero. Simply by that, the simplest concept of that is if you win, or let's say earn tomorrow £100, $100, whatever, someone else has lost that. They've had to pay it to you. Do you see? Every action has an equal and opposite reaction. It's all physics. There's nothing profound here. It can just be made to sound profound. That's the problem, and many people are doing that. My perspective has always been to try to take the profound and make it as simple as possible, because that way I can get to understand it. So it's kind of inductive, for me anyway. So there you have the Gaussian copula formula. The guy who actually wrote that, by the way, David Lee, I think his name was, came from China, did his job, and very interestingly buggered off back to China as everything came tumbling down, to do risk management, basically, for the Chinese government. So there you go. You have to kind of put two and two together and see if you actually do get four all the time. So that's the Gaussian copula formula. The principle behind why everything came down has been discussed. I've got books here from leading academics in Cambridge and Oxford and all sorts of places that, they discuss all very relevant things, but they're all looking at it from inside the box. At no point does anyone step outside it and say, actually, the solution to all of this is to issue the currency as a credit note. But we won't get into that. what are the mechanics of fractional reserve? Because this is a huge subject out there. It's the great new evil. And whereas I think it certainly has been and can be used for that, I wouldn't say fractional reserve was the great evil at all. That is a distraction from my perspective. And so many people fall for it. But what is fractional reserve? Again, in simple terms, a government issues bonds to the bank. The bank loans out 90% of the money. The borrower spends the money. The seller deposits the money into the bank. And you go back to point 2 where the bank loans out 90% of the money again. It goes around and around. So it cycles. Now that's been seen as a great evil. Whilst taking that into account, don't lose sight of the fact that it's also made somebody vast amounts of money doing that. That wealth, that money, really has just gone to the wrong place. That's all. So fractional reserve is a necessary, it's a necessary thing within any banking system for as long as we have a banking system. What is key is to manage it, and that's quite simple. So the whole banking crisis actually isn't down to all of the great conspiracies that that are talked about and that I myself talk about. It's actually down to a great fraud, a very, very simple one that is already illegal, and they don't want you to see this because you must not lose sight of the fact that these people truly are international criminal gangster crooks whose sole intention is to do this to you. And if it results in war, they want that too. We've all learned this by now. So let's start actually believing it and live in that reality. It's more like now being, I don't know, the French Marquis, as the Nazis have crossed the border. And the problem is, they're already here. This is a Nazi thing that's unfolding. I've said for years, they didn't lose the Second World War. Most people can quite rationalize that now. If they didn't lose it, what did they do? And where would that have put us nowadays, do you think? Would it be like some movies have tried to make out, or would it actually be just what we have? This is what's behind it. And again, a leap further into the Jesuits. Well, again, pretty plausible evidence out there to show that the two are highly linked. The Pope did, after all, authorize and sign the SS into existence. So, yes, it's complex. It's very complex. It does go right through the murder of JFK. The fact that the next president truly was a criminal, just a criminal stooge for the mafia. It's all there, and it can all be rationalized. But at the end of the day, we're still left thinking, well, what the hell can we do? Well, I'll tell you what someone thought we could do last time it happened. And at risk of boring you, I'm going to read even more. This one, though, from the War Memoirs of David Lloyd George. And this book smells wonderful. It's original.